They thought she was just another nanny candidate. One more face in a long line of strangers who never lasted more than a week. But within minutes of walking into that pristine Austin home, Mariah noticed what no one else had. Two children who weren't starving because they disliked food. They were starving because they were holding on to something much heavier than hunger. What unfolded at that dining table would expose a truth their father had been too broken to face, and a stranger would dare to say the words everyone else had avoided. Sometimes it takes an outsider to drag a family back from the edge. The Hale residence looked like perfection from the curb. Tall white columns, a manicured lawn, a driveway with two gleaming SUVs. Inside, the perfection cracked. The kitchen was immaculate but lifeless, like a stage set that no one actually used. The long walnut table held 3 place settings, but only 2 were occupied. Sophia and Luke, 7-year-old twins, sat with untouched plates of roast chicken and green beans. The overhead lights glowed too bright, bouncing off polished marble, exposing how little warmth the house actually carried. Ryan Hale stood near the counter, sleeves rolled up, phone buzzing every few minutes with messages from investors and lawyers. He was a CEO fighting to keep control of his company in the middle of a takeover war. But in that moment, he wasn't a businessman. He was a father staring at 2 children who hadn't finished a real meal in half a year. "Please," he said, his voice cracking despite the calm he tried to project. "Just eat something. Anything." Sophia shook her head. She pushed a few peas around with her fork and mumbled, "Not hungry." Luke didn't even look at his food. He stabbed a piece of chicken half-heartedly, then let it slide off the fork. From across the table, Mariah observed silently. She had been in the house less than an hour, brought in for a trial shift to see if she might finally be the nanny Ryan could trust. She was 30, with calm eyes and a grounded presence that contrasted with the sterile luxury of the Hale home. Already she could sense what doctors and therapists had missed. This wasn't about food. It was about grief. Heavy, suffocating, unspoken grief. Ryan rubbed his temples and muttered, "I don't know what to do anymore." "Mr. Hale," Mariah said gently, "may I ask them something?" He glanced at her, desperate enough to agree. "Go ahead. If you can get them to eat, you'll be the first." Mariah crouched so her eyes were level with the twins. Her tone was different, not pleading, not commanding, just curious. "Hey, do you ever get cravings? Like for popcorn at the movies or pancakes on a Saturday morning?" For the first time all evening, Luke's eyes flickered. "Popcorn," he admitted, still not smiling. "And chocolate," Sophia whispered, almost ashamed of the confession. "So you do feel hungry sometimes?" Mariah said with a knowing smile. "Just not for this kind of food, right?" The kids exchanged a glance. Something shifted, like a wall they had built suddenly showing cracks. Luke leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "We're saving." Mariah tilted her head. "Saving what, sweetheart?" "Food," Sophia answered, tears glistening. Ryan frowned, confused. "Saving food? What do you mean?" Sophia bolted from the table and raced upstairs. A moment later, she came back clutching a shoebox. She set it on the table and lifted the lid with trembling fingers. Inside were scraps. Half a cookie wrapped in tissue, dried bits of macaroni and cheese, sandwich crusts sealed in a plastic bag. "For Mom," Sophia said. Her voice broke on the word. "When she comes back, she'll be hungry." Ryan's breath caught in his chest. For months, he'd danced around the truth, trying to soften it, hoping time would do what words could not. Seeing the shoebox, his children hoarding spoiled food for a mother who would never return, was almost more than he could bear. He dropped to his knees in front of them, hands shaking. "Sweethearts, Mom's not coming back. We talked about this." "But what if she's lost?" Sophia cried, her small hands clutching the box. "What if she's out there and she's hungry?" Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat locked. He looked over the children's heads at Mariah, his eyes pleading for help. She slid closer, keeping her voice steady and warm. "Do you know what I think?" she asked softly. Both twins looked at her through tears. "I think if your mom could see you right now, she'd want you to eat. Moms always want their kids healthy and strong. She wouldn't want you getting sick because you're saving food for her." Luke bit his lip. But if she could come back, then she'd want to find you laughing, growing, running faster than ever, Mariah replied. She'd want to see you living, not shrinking away. The words hung in the air, gentle but undeniable. Ryan felt a lump in his throat as he watched the impossible happen. His children listening, really listening. Mariah leaned in closer. How about this? We make a little deal. Every time you eat, you can imagine your mom smiling at you, proud of you, because she would be, and you won't have to do it alone. I'll eat with you. Deal? Sophia wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and gave a hesitant nod. Luke shrugged, but his shoulders loosened. Ryan exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Will you eat with us right now? Luke asked cautiously. Of course, Mariah said, but let's make something simple first. Something fun. Ever had real kettle corn? Sweet, warm, crunchy? Sophia's face lit with a spark Ryan hadn't seen since before the funeral. Can we? Yes, Mariah smiled, but after we eat some of this first. Think of it as fuel for dessert. That night, for the first time in half a year, Ryan watched his children eat most of what was on their plates. It wasn't much, but it was everything. He sat there in stunned silence, realizing that in less than 3 hours this woman had accomplished what specialists, tutors, and even he had failed to do. Later, when the kids were finally asleep, he found Mariah rinsing dishes in the kitchen. The house was quiet, almost peaceful. Thank you, Ryan said simply. Mariah shook her head. I just listened. No, he said firmly. In 6 months, no one has reached them. You did in one night. She looked down, drying her hands with a towel. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to notice what's really going on inside. Ryan studied her for a moment. He realized then that he might have found more than a nanny. He might have found someone who could help his family heal. If you believe this story deserves to be heard, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Hale residence, painting the kitchen in a softer glow than usual. Ryan was already dressed for work, standing by the counter with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. He wasn't reading the financial reports in front of him, nor was he answering the string of urgent messages flashing across his phone. He was watching the way his children leaned over the kitchen island, giggling as Mariah sprinkled flour onto their little hands. Lucas tried shaping the dough into something resembling a pancake, his face scrunched with concentration. Sophia burst into laughter when the dough stuck to his fingers. For months, breakfast had been an exercise in silence, a ritual of uneaten food and forced encouragement. Today, the air smelled of cinnamon and butter, and the kitchen hummed with a kind of warmth Ryan had thought he'd lost forever. You'll get it, Mariah said patiently, guiding Luke's hands with her own. The trick is not to press too hard. Let the dough breathe. Ryan felt a strange pull in his chest. He hadn't seen his kids this alive in months, and it wasn't just their laughter. It was the way Mariah seemed to understand their rhythm instantly, stepping into their fragile world without forcing herself in. She wasn't performing. She wasn't pretending. She was simply present, and somehow that was exactly what they needed. When the twins finally sat at the table, plates full of fluffy pancakes dusted with sugar, Ryan joined them. He expected the usual resistance, but instead both children dug in with surprising eagerness. Sophia took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then looked up at her father with wide eyes. Daddy, it tastes like home. The words hit him harder than he expected. Home. He swallowed against the lump rising in his throat and managed a smile. Then we should have this more often. Mariah poured orange juice into their glasses and slid into a chair across from him. She didn't need to say anything. The children's smiles were proof enough. But Ryan found himself studying her, curious about the quiet strength she carried. Most people would have come in with a plan, with techniques and rules. She had come in with empathy, and it was working. After breakfast, Ryan pulled on his blazer and grabbed his briefcase. He lingered at the doorway, watching as Mariah knelt beside Sophia to help her with a shoelace. Lucas was babbling about a school project, his words tripping over each other in excitement. It was ordinary, completely ordinary. And yet Ryan hadn't seen it in so long that it felt extraordinary. He cleared his throat. "Mariah, do you need anything today? Supplies, groceries, whatever?" She looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I brought some things from my grandmother's pantry back home. Spices, recipes that remind kids of comfort. But the kitchen is missing basics. I'll make a list. Get whatever you need," Ryan said quickly. "No limits." She hesitated, then nodded. He wanted to say more, to tell her how much this sudden change meant to him. But the words tangled somewhere between gratitude and vulnerability. So instead, he left for the office, carrying with him the sound of his children's laughter, something he hadn't heard in far too long. By the afternoon, Mariah had transformed the sterile kitchen into something resembling life. Pots simmered with homemade soup, fresh bread baked in the oven, and the counter was scattered with bowls of colorful spices she'd unpacked from her box. The twins hovered close, eager to taste everything. Sophia dipped her finger into a jar of nutmeg, wrinkling her nose before laughing. Luke insisted on stirring the pot, nearly spilling half of it onto the floor. Mariah didn't scold. She guided them gently, turning the chaos into a lesson. When Ryan returned that evening, exhausted from another brutal day of negotiations, the scent hit him before he even stepped inside. He paused in the entryway, letting the warmth of the smell wash over him. For months, the house had smelled of reheated takeout, antiseptic cleaners, and loneliness. Tonight, it smelled like someone cared enough to cook. In the dining room, the twins were already at the table, faces glowing with anticipation. Mariah placed bowls in front of them and said, "Remember, eat slowly and savor it. This is how my grandmother used to make it for me." Ryan slipped into his seat, loosening his tie. He watched as Sophia took a spoonful, eyes closing as if the taste itself was a hug. Luke grinned, announcing, "It's better than pizza night." Ryan let out a laugh, surprised by his own voice. He tasted the soup. It was rich, layered, comforting in a way that reminded him of childhood winters long before life had turned complicated. After dinner, when the kids were upstairs brushing their teeth, Ryan found Mariah in the kitchen wiping down the counter. She looked up at him, uncertain. He realized she was waiting for a verdict. "You've done more in 2 days than anyone else managed in 6 months," Ryan said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you." She gave a small smile. "You don't have to. This is what I love, helping families remember how to be families." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "But it's more than that. You reached them in a way I couldn't." Her eyes softened, but she didn't respond right away. Finally, she said, "Sometimes parents carry so much grief they can't see what their kids are carrying. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means you were hurting too." The words cut through him sharper than he expected, because they were true. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but all he managed was a quiet maybe. That night, as he lay in bed, Ryan found his mind wandering. He thought of his late wife, of how her laughter used to fill the house, of how she would have adored Mariah's warmth with the children. Then he thought of the way Sophia had said the pancakes tasted like home. He hadn't realized how desperately they all needed that feeling again. Him, most of all. The following days slipped into a new rhythm. Mornings began with laughter in the kitchen, afternoons with homework spread across the dining table while Mariah supervised, evenings with homemade dinners that drew Ryan away from his office earlier than usual. The twins grew brighter, more talkative. They no longer picked at their meals or hid scraps in boxes. They were slowly learning to live again. Ryan noticed the changes in himself too. He started leaving work earlier, ignoring some of the relentless calls. He found himself watching Mariah when she wasn't looking, studying the ease with which she handled his children, the patience in her voice, the quiet sadness that lingered in her eyes when she thought no one was paying attention. One evening, after the twins were tucked into bed, Ryan walked into the kitchen to find Mariah cleaning up yet again. He leaned against the doorway, hesitant. "Stay," he said finally. She looked at him, puzzled. "Stay longer. With us. With them." Mariah set down the dish towel slowly. "Ryan, are you asking me to be their nanny or something more?" He faltered, caught off guard by the bluntness. I don't know yet. But what I do know is that you've given us something we didn't think we'd ever get back. And I'm afraid of losing that. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. Mariah's eyes searched his, and for a moment, it seemed like the house itself held its breath. The following week began with a storm outside and inside the Hale household. Rain lashed against the wide windows of the family room, and the children sat cross-legged on the floor building towers of blocks that toppled every few minutes. Mariah joined them, laughing softly each time the pieces scattered. Ryan stood in the doorway, jacket still damp from the downpour, briefcase hanging loosely from his hand. He had meant to head straight for his office, but the sound of his children's laughter stopped him cold. It had been so long since their home had echoed like this. Mariah looked up and caught his eye. For a moment, neither moved. There was no pretense, no formal exchange, just a brief understanding that something fragile and good had begun to grow between them. Ryan cleared his throat, setting the briefcase down, and asked if he could join. The children squealed in delight, pulling him down into their game. For an hour, Ryan forgot about board meetings, lawyers, and the acquisition threatening his company. For an hour, he was only a father again. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Ryan lingered in the kitchen where Mariah was rinsing dishes. He picked up a towel and began drying them without being asked. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rain on the windows. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "I want to," he replied. "I don't do enough around here. I should have been doing this all along." Her hand slowed as she washed the last plate. "You've been carrying more than anyone should. People forget that fathers grieve too." The words slipped under his defenses. He turned, leaning against the counter, studying her profile as she stacked the dishes. He thought of how easily she had slipped into their lives, how naturally she filled the spaces that had been empty since his wife's death. It terrified him, and it comforted him in equal measure. "Mariah," he began, then faltered. She glanced at him, waiting. "You've done more for them than I knew was possible. And for me too, I think." Her eyes softened, but she shook her head. "I came here to do a job. Nothing more." Ryan swallowed the words he wanted to say, words that felt dangerous. He nodded instead, but the silence that followed was full of everything left unsaid. The next morning, he left for work earlier than usual, burying himself in meetings that blurred together. His colleagues noticed he was distracted, that his phone lit up with messages he rarely answered. By late afternoon, he stared at the spreadsheets without seeing numbers. All he could think about was the way Mariah had looked at him the night before, the way his children had clung to her stories, the ease that filled the house when she was near. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away, but they clung stubbornly. At home, Mariah faced her own battle. She had come intending to stay only temporarily, to help the children through the worst of their grief, yet each day they carved deeper into her heart. Sophia began calling her into the bedroom at night just to whisper about her mother's favorite songs. Lucas begged her to watch him draw superheroes at the dining table, and every time Ryan walked into the room, Mariah felt something shift inside her, something she tried desperately to ignore. That Friday, Ryan returned home later than usual, his expression tense. The children had already eaten and were curled up on the couch with Mariah, listening to her read from a book. He stopped in the doorway again, letting the sight hold him. Sophia's head rested on Mariah's shoulder, Luke's eyes were heavy with sleep, and Mariah's voice carried through the dim room like a balm. When she closed the book, she looked up and found Ryan watching. Their eyes locked, and the air thickened. She carefully tucked the children into bed, then returned to the living room where Ryan still stood. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly damp from the rain. He looked less like the confident CEO the world knew, and more like a man unraveling. "You're late," she said softly, not accusing, just observing. "Things at the office are complicated," he admitted. Then he added, almost against his will, "But coming home to this makes everything else feel survivable." She folded her arms, uncertain. "Ryan, we can't pretend this is normal. I was hired to help the children, that's all." He stepped closer, his voice lower now. And yet you've helped me too. More than you know. Mariah's heart pounded. She had promised herself she wouldn't let this happen. She couldn't allow feelings to complicate the fragile healing she had built with the children. But the way he looked at her, as though she were the only steady thing in his collapsing world, made her want to forget every rule she had set for herself. She turned away, picking up the empty glasses from the coffee table. "It's dangerous, Ryan. For all of us." His voice followed her, quiet but insistent. "Maybe, but so is pretending I don't feel it." The words echoed long after she had retreated to her room. Over the weekend, tension simmered beneath the surface. They cooked together, played with the children, shared meals, but every glance carried weight. Every brush of hands lingered too long. Ryan found himself laughing more, but also thinking too much when the house grew quiet. Mariah found herself searching his eyes, only to look away quickly when she saw too much reflected back. Sunday evening, Ryan decided to attempt pancakes again, insisting he could manage without help. Predictably, smoke filled the kitchen within minutes. The children erupted in laughter and Mariah rushed in, swatting at the smoke with a towel. Ryan surrendered the spatula, grinning sheepishly. "Guess I'm hopeless." "You just need practice," Mariah teased, standing close enough that he could smell the faint lavender of her shampoo. The children cheered when she guided his hands on the spatula, showing him how to flip the batter. Their laughter filled the kitchen, but Ryan barely heard it. All he could feel was her hand over his, steady and sure. Later, when the children were asleep, Ryan found Mariah folding laundry in the guest room. He hesitated in the doorway before speaking. "Stay. Not just as their caretaker. Stay for us." She froze, then slowly set the folded shirt down. "Ryan, don't. You're grieving. You're vulnerable. This isn't fair to you or to me." He stepped closer, shaking his head. "I know grief. I live with it every day. But what I feel for you isn't confusion. It's the first thing in months that feels real." Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but fear pressed hard against her ribs. "And if it doesn't last? What happens to your children if I become another person who leaves?" Ryan's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "Then I'll take that risk, because losing you without trying would be worse." Mariah felt tears prick her eyes. She couldn't answer. Instead, she whispered goodnight and slipped past him, leaving Ryan standing in the doorway with more questions than answers. That night, neither of them slept. Mariah stared at the ceiling, wondering how she had let herself fall so deeply, and Ryan sat in his study, staring at family photos until the first light of dawn broke across the sky. They were two people caught between the past and the possibility of a future neither had dared imagine. And somewhere upstairs, two children slept peacefully, unaware that their family was on the brink of being remade once again. The following week began with distance. Ryan buried himself in conference calls, avoiding long conversations. Mariah sensed the withdrawal, and though she kept smiling for the children, her chest felt hollow. She had started browsing job postings at night, telling herself it was for the best. The children were growing stronger now. Perhaps her role had come to an end. Yet every time she packed a small bag to test the thought of leaving, she would hear Sophia's laughter down the hall or Luke's footsteps rushing to show her a drawing, and she would falter. One night, Sophia woke with a fever. Mariah pressed a cool cloth to her forehead, whispering stories until the girl fell back asleep. Ryan appeared in the doorway, worry etched across his face. "How bad is it?" he whispered. "Nothing serious," Mariah replied gently. "Probably just a virus from school. She'll be fine." He stepped inside, watching her care for his daughter with tenderness that made his throat tighten. "I shouldn't have left you to handle this alone," he murmured. "You've been handling everything alone for too long," she said softly. Their eyes met, but before either could speak again, Luke stirred in the other room, and the moment passed. By morning, Sophia's fever had broken, but the tension between Ryan and Mariah only grew. At breakfast, the children sensed something. Luke pushed his cereal around the bowl and finally asked, "Tia Mariah, are you going to leave?" The question landed like a stone in the quiet kitchen. Mariah froze, the spoon in her hand trembling. "Why would you ask that?" she said carefully. "Because you and Dad don't talk anymore." Luke said bluntly. "And last night I heard you crying." Ryan looked at her sharply, guilt washing over him. Mariah forced a smile, trying to reassure them. "I'm not going anywhere right now. I promise." But her voice wavered, and the children exchanged worried looks. Later that day, Ryan found her in the guest room folding clothes into a suitcase. "You're really leaving," he said, his voice raw. She didn't look at him. "It's what's best. For you. For the kids." "Don't say that," he snapped, then softened. "You know that's not true. Ryan, they've already lost one mother. I can't be another person who disappears." He stepped closer, desperate. "Then don't disappear. Stay. Not as their nanny, not as some temporary fix. Stay because you're part of this family now." Her hands stilled on the suitcase. Slowly, she turned to face him. "And what about you? Where do I fit into your life, Ryan?" He swallowed, the weight of months pressing against his chest. "You fit everywhere. You've been carrying pieces of me I thought were gone forever. His voice broke. "I love you, Mariah." She blinked, stunned. She had imagined those words, but hearing them made her knees weak. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "You're grateful, maybe. You're lonely. But love? I know the difference," he said firmly. "I loved Emily, and that love will never vanish. But what I feel for you is different, and just as real. You've given me back my children. You've given me back myself. Please don't walk away." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the rain against the window. Mariah's heart raced. She wanted to believe him, but fear still gnawed at her. Then she heard a small sniffle near the door. Turning, she saw Sophia and Luke peeking in, eyes wide. "Daddy," Sophia whispered. "If you love her, can she be our mom too?" Tears stung Mariah's eyes. She knelt, opening her arms. The children ran to her, clinging tightly. Over their heads, she met Ryan's gaze, and in that look, all the walls she had built began to crumble. "I'll stay," she whispered finally. The children squealed with joy, hugging tighter. Ryan crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around all 3 of them. For the first time since Emily's death, the house felt whole. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the family changed. Ryan began leaving work earlier to join dinners. Mariah introduced new recipes that turned meal times into rituals of laughter and discovery. The children thrived, their cheeks filling out, their eyes bright. Slowly, the grief that had strangled the household loosened its grip. One evening, Ryan and Mariah sat on the porch after the children were asleep. Fireflies glowed across the yard, and the summer air carried the scent of jasmine. Ryan reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "I don't want to waste any more time," he said. "I want you here, officially, as their mother, as my partner. Will you marry me?" Mariah's breath caught. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The wedding was small, held in the backyard beneath strings of lights. Sophia scattered flower petals down the aisle, and Luke carried the rings proudly. Friends and family gathered, but the loudest cheer came from the children when the vows were spoken. Ryan and Mariah kissed as husband and wife, and the future stretched wide before them. Months later, Mariah opened a cafe in town, serving the recipes her grandmother had taught her. She named it Hearth and Home, a tribute to the family she had found. Ryan invested not just money, but his time, helping her build it into a place filled with warmth and community. The children bragged to their friends that their mom made the best cornbread in Texas. Reporters came, drawn by the story of the widow who had found love again, of the nanny who became the cornerstone of a new family. But inside the Hale home, none of that mattered. What mattered was the laughter at the dinner table, the bedtime stories read in voices both gentle and strong, the knowledge that love had rebuilt what grief had broken. On a quiet night, Ryan tucked the children into bed and found Mariah waiting in the hallway. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" she asked softly. "For saving us," he said. She smiled, brushing her lips against his. "We saved each other." Down the hall, Sophia whispered to her brother, "Do you think Mom can see us from heaven?" Luke nodded. "Yeah." and I think she's smiling. And in that house, filled once again with light and love, the Hale family finally felt whole. If this story touched you, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Because sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures, but with a simple meal shared at the table and the courage to love again.